Hello my precious everyone, welcome back to Wow Mel. Today I will be giving some advice on what DMPCs are and how to use them effectively. As always, this is simply what I do. I am in no way a D&D expert, and what works for my table might not work for yours, so keep that in mind throughout the video. I was admittedly quite surprised to learn how adamantly people despise DMPCs, because in both the module that I ran and the homebrew campaign that I'm running now, me and my party loved the DMPCs and they really added another layer to the campaign. But perhaps part of the disconnect stems from what you believe the definition of a DMPC is. The most basic definition is that a DMPC is a player character run by the DM. The common understanding is that this character is created the same way PCs are. They level with them and stick with the party for most of the campaign. Basically, they're just like any of the other players, except they're run by a DM, hence DMPC. My definition is a little bit different than that though. I would encourage others to be more flexible in their own definitions, or at least more open to ideas of non-traditional DMPCs. In general, I view them as extra permanent members of the group run by the DM who are more complex than the average NPC and play a somewhat significant role. Obviously, that was vague and a little confusing, so I'll try and clarify myself a little bit more. My definition blurs the line between like typical NPC and DMPC, and I think that's okay and probably a little bit necessary. For example, I once ran the module Lost Minds of Phandelver. My party wound up coercing a character named Sildar Hallwinter into joining them, not only for like the beginning part where he's supposed to be, but for the entire campaign he was with them. Even though his stat block wasn't as complex as a normal player's because he was with them for every single battle, I gave him a few extra moves. He did assist both in combat and out of combat in really pivotal scenes. According to the first definition, he isn't a DMPC because he wasn't created in the same way that player characters are and he's not quite on their level, but according to my definition, he is a DMPC. The technicalities of what you call them, be them permanent or adopted NPCs, DMPCs, or whatever else, when push comes to shove, it doesn't really matter. But if you get really stuck on the fact that I call them DMPCs when perhaps technically they aren't, you can just take this all as encouragement to use a beefed up NPC versus a normal DMPC. Because to be honest, that's a little closer to the reality of what I do. Never fear though, if you really want to use just a normal DMPC who's made the same way as player characters and all that stuff, most of these tips still will apply, so I got your back no matter what. The second component we should look into before getting into the tips is why do people use DMPCs? If you're not sure whether or not you should use them, maybe compare your situation to this list. I can think of 3 main reasons people use them. Although I hear sometimes people use them in campaigns where they like switch out the DM, so when the DM switches, they have a player character no matter who it is. I'm not well versed in those types of campaigns, so I won't be talking at any length about those. But the 3 reasons I'm more familiar with are that they use them for campaigns where they are short on party members or players, where they need someone to fill a vital role, or the DM just wants to play it because it's fun. For example, if you're running a campaign but there's only 2 players, you might want to add in a few DMPCs to kind of beef up their numbers to help in combat and roleplay situations so the group doesn't consist of the same 2 people who are always talking to each other. It might get a little bit stale. As for the second reason, me and traditional D&D roles don't mesh really well, but that's another topic for another video. If most of your party is super tanky or melee fighters or like damage casters, you might not have anyone who's like a designated healer or who wants to be a healer because they just want to do that sweet
damaged.
Understandable, but they might still want a healer in the group, and that's where DMPC can come in, where the DM can run the healer and fill in that missing spot. The third reason is the reason that I play one. It's fun. I like being a sort of player in the group and getting to participate in scenes and combat where other NPCs might not really be involved. I saw someone say once that if you're a DM and you want to be a player, you should just join another campaign as a player instead of trying to like force your way to be a player in this campaign. And in some cases that's probably true, but I don't think that has to be the cake. The cake? I was thinking of you can have your cake and eat it too, or you can't have your cake and eat it too. That doesn't have to be the case. Also, playing in multiple campaigns isn't really an option for everyone, so I think DMPCs are a solid option if you want it. You can play them, but you have to make sure you and the party are all on the same page and that you play them very carefully. But now you know what they are and why you might want to use one, I can actually give you set tips on how to play them carefully. Number 1, make sure your party is on board with them. This is the absolute most important thing. Adding a DMPC can seriously change up the campaign, can change up battles, role-playing scenes, party dynamics, pretty much everything. A DMPC is not someone you just want to spring onto the group. Up front, you should mention that you want to play a DMPC, explain what their role would kind of be, why you want to be them, and answer any questions your players might have. And if they're not okay with it, don't add them. If they're on the fence, there are 2 things you can do. Number 1 is to add a back door in case the players wind up not liking the DMPC. In my homebrew campaign, my DMPC is named Elwin, and he is super intertwined with one of the characters in the party, so much that it honestly would not make any sense for him to just suddenly leave. Don't do this unless you are 100% certain your party is okay with you having a DMPC, which I was certain my party was okay with it and we are all good. Make sure, especially if they're on the fence, that there is some sort of backdoor. Maybe don't kill off their family. So if the party winds up not liking that DMPC, you can have the DMPC's family like send them a letter and they're like,
"Yo, sonny boy, we need you home. Please come home."
Boom, they're gone. Or maybe be a little bit more open to them dying in battle. There's some sort of exit strategy here you should have baked in. Don't make them very solidly part of the group unless you're sure that the party wants them around. I think they would be a lot more open to test driving a DMPC if they knew that if they didn't like them, there was a way for them to leave. The second option is to create a bit of an adoptable DMPC. This one like especially blurs the line between NPC and DMPC because a lot of them will just start off as normal NPCs, and as they become more and more intertwined with the party, they might take on the feeling of a DMPC. Like I said, the technicalities don't really matter. You can create a few characters who aren't part of the party to start with and don't just come up and they're like,
"Hey, make me part of the party."
But maybe they are sent on like one specific quest with the party, and if the players end up taking a liking to them, that NPC can be convinced to join. Again, do not throw themselves onto the party, then they kind of feel like forced into taking them. Make them able to be convinced to join if the party is open to that. You'll see this a lot in campaigns where people like adopt little goblin children and just cute little NPCs they find. That is like a very organic way to take one on. They can have them join the party, and as time passes, and especially if they're used in combat a lot, you might be able to give them a few more moves as they level up with the party, and then they will become more complex than the average NPC and play a somewhat significant role, and then they're a DMPC, at least in my eyes. The second tip to running a successful DMPC is to simplify them. Elwin started out as just a normal one I made using normal character rules using D&D Beyond. We did a single test battle that had like 3 enemies, and I realized I was in way over my head. I was running multiple enemies with their own stat blocks, and then I had Elwin over here who was a battle master, so we had all these maneuvers and I wasn't totally familiar with them. So during the battle, I was like scrambling to come up with the best move for the enemies and the best move for him and balancing what's happening with the players. Playing him like a normal PC was significantly bogging down battle, and that wasn't worth it to me. So what I did was make a new stat block for him. I transferred obviously like his stats and his proficiencies and things, but then I kind of picked out a few of his maneuvers and features, so he had cool abilities that made him stand out from just the average Joe commoner NPC, but he wasn't quite as complex as a normal PC, so I was able to play him much better and smoother in battle. I kept, I think, 2 of his battle maneuvers and his action surge and his protection fighting style, and then otherwise cut out a few of the extra things. Don't take center stage, Combat Edition. An important part of making DMPCs not annoying is to keep them from hogging the spotlight and playing them more as supportive characters. I don't mean necessarily that you have to be like a traditional support class or that they can't do damage or anything like that. They don't have to be the mascot for the group, but they shouldn't be stealing moments from the players. Giving them simplified abilities and spells that don't have like super long paragraphs to figure out how they work will not only make them faster to run, but it'll keep them from just seeming too showy. And I would also recommend not letting them have a bunch of killing blows, even if maybe they would be the one to finish off the enemy, at least when it comes to bosses. If the players have been spending the last 55 minutes fighting a dragon, and then your fighter McHelper Boy finishes him off, you can let your DMPC have cool moments, and if they never get in a kill, it might honestly seem a little bit suspicious to the players, but in general, it's a lot more satisfying for the players to do big things like finishing off a super huge boss for themselves. On that note, I would also recommend not letting your DMPC be higher level than the players. I think they should be at, or even potentially a little bit below the player's level. Just don't make them too low leveled where they keep getting slaughtered in battle, because then the players will kind of have to like babysit them in battle, and in a weird backwards way, the battle will become about them again. It'll be like protect the squishy. It's difficult enough to run a DMPC without kind of hogging the spotlight, so making them super high level and doing really high damage and having all these crazy high level abilities will definitely make it much harder. Don't take center stage. Out of Combat Edition. One of the biggest complaints about DMPCs is that they know too much, or they're railroading the party, or they just overall give off the feeling of
being the DM's favorite, like Mary Sue,
who the whole campaign is about. Firstly, and this should be obvious, but just to reiterate, keep what you know as a DM and what the DMPC knows separate. Don't super optimize your DMPC to be the best at slaying a specific type of monster if you know they're going to run into them like far down the line, but the party doesn't know that yet. Don't make them like
the smartest master of all lore in the area who knows everything about everyone.
It will just make them look like, for lack of a better term, a know-it-all. For a specific in-game example, let's say there's a room with cleverly hidden traps. You as a DM know that they're in there. Don't make your DMPC look for them unless they were perhaps told to, or they already have an actual in-game inkling for a specific reason to think that there's traps in there. If it's not in their character to be super paranoid and always check for traps, and then the one room that they check for traps is the one room that the traps are in, it's gonna be obvious and really annoying to the players. A way I sort of avoid this character DM knowledge overlap, it might seem a little drastic to some, but I generally don't make Elwyn roll anything unless a PC specifically asks him to. This isn't in combat, of course. Combat's kind of a different situation. He basically has a personality of a golden retriever puppy, where he's very loyal and happy to follow the party and do basically whatever they want him to, but he's not really bold enough to do things of his own volition. But this creates a perfect sort of situation, because if the players need his help or they need a hint, they can request it of him and he'll do it. But he won't go around figuring things out and furthering the plot all on his own. Perhaps give them a little bit more of a laid-back personality. Of course, you don't have to do this, but if your character's a really big jump right into it go-getter, it wouldn't really make sense for them to not just go ahead and roll to look at a bunch of stuff. But as a DM, if you're running a DMPC, you should really sit back and let your players make most of the discoveries. So making like a chill kind of character who just does what they're asked and not go like too out on their own doing things. That definitely seems to help things, and I think is one of the major reasons Elwyn works so well in the party. Number 5. Back out of a backstory. Of course, your character would have a past, and it's okay if it's a little tragic. They still need a reason to go out adventuring and be with the party. But I would recommend not giving them a super complicated backstory with a bunch of plot hooks that'll come up in sessions. In my homebrew campaign, the PC's backstories are very interwoven into it, so much that references to them pop up in almost every single session, and their whole adventures centered around the characters' pasts. However, there's not going to be some big campaign arc around Elwyn's backstory because it's just not necessary. He's there for support. When an adventure is centered on a character's backstory or their goals, that character and the player gets put in the spotlight for a bit, and that is perfectly okay. It's good to have players in the spotlight on occasion, so long as the spotlight gets moved around and everybody gets their chance to shine. Except your DMPC, because they don't really need it. You know, you're the DM. You're in the spotlight all the time. It's kind of part of the job. If a lot of moments, or worse, the entire campaign, is centered around this DMPC and their life and their story, your players are gonna feel like they don't need to be there. Because if you're playing the villain and the hero, they're not needed. It's okay if your DMPC is beloved by the party. It's okay if they are a pretty important member of the group. In fact, when I asked my players who their favorite NPC was, they didn't even consider Elwyn an option, because they did consider him a member of the party. Every table is gonna have a different balance that they need to strike, but the party could go on without Elwyn. Elwyn can't go on without the party. And that's the kind of situation you have to create for yourself. I think that's a good indicator that you've made sure your players are still important. More important, as they should be, than the DMPC is. I know I've been talking at you guys a lot, and DMPCs are complicated, and people have very mixed, intense feelings about them. If you have any other tips on how to run them smoothly in a campaign, or pitfalls you should probably avoid, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to actually, hit like, subscribe, maybe even the notification bell. I make Dungeons & Dragons videos, like advice ones, and I'm looking to start making little animations soon. I also make a lot of cosplay videos if you're into that sort of thing, so be sure to check out some of my other stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful day, my precious everyone, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!